Heat clung like a brand. The river answered with cool, indifferent hands. Beside the yellow-brown run of the Yellowstone, Clara Dane stood in black from throat to boot, her blue kerchief lifting like a torn scrap of sky. She opened her palm, a bright circle burning her skin, and threw her wedding ring into the current. Murmurs followed it, low as flies. On the road behind her, a debt man folded his ledger, the corner of his mouth hooked like a barb. He had weighed her name in numbers, and found her wanting. The town watched to see if shame would drown her too. From the willows a horseman eased from shadow to light, and then into water, leather darkening, braid of reins floating like a harmless snake. He slid deeper until the river took his waist, reached with a patient hand, and pinched the glint from the riffle. Clara's breath hitched, not from fear, but from the sudden mercy of it. He waded back and set the ring in her damp palm without closing her fingers. "I won't take what's not chosen," he said. "I'll keep it safe or give it back when you ask." Heat versus water, hate versus mercy. The choice lay shining there. She tied the blue kerchief at her wrist, the fabric dark with river, and let the ring rest in its fold. Behind them, the ledger man spat dust. Before them, the water moved on, unbothered by small cruelties. The ring waited like a question. By day, silence kept her safe. By dusk, music kept her alive. What the river began did not cancel a ledger. After the crowd drifted home, Clara walked the road alone to River's Bend, the blue kerchief still damp at her wrist, the skin under it cool where the ring had lain. When the debt man reached to seize it as security, she looked past him, to the horseman, and with a nod, let the glint pass into his keeping. He wrapped it in the kerchief she pressed into his hand, and said only, low, that a thing returned should be wanted. In 1883, the town was all edges, rail talk without rails, a ferry rope scabbed with knots, and a livery with an iron brand hung high above its doors like a sermon. Water argued otherwise, patient and wide, fingering gravel into songs no lawman could write down. Clara was a widow in black because the town required a color, not because grief needed help to be heavy. Her husband had taught her how small a woman could be made without breaking bone, hard hands on the pantry door, soft apologies that never stayed soft. Death took him quick, but left his debts like fence posts across her path, interest sprouting barbs. The church ladies called her barren, unlucky, a warning whispered in starch and lace. She made herself useful to survive and quiet to remain invisible. At dusk, she let herself into the church with the extra key and worked the pump organ until the bellows sighed like a tired animal. Hymns poured through her fingers, nearer, sheltering, be still, and in those minutes, silence became music, and shame loosened a notch. Through the door, left ajar, the saloon's laughter belted heat into the street, bright as whiskey fire. She had learned the difference between warmth and a blaze that eats. The horseman the town called Ben Stone came and went like a weather change. He traded horses with a quiet competence, speaking when there was something worth saying, stepping aside when talk turned mean. Upriver, among his own people, he had responsibilities that did not wear boots and spurs. He carried them in his posture and in the way he watched the river before he crossed. In town he kept to the willows and the edges, as if he knew how quickly curiosity could be turned into a cage. He noticed what most pretended not to see. He saw Clara carry a feed sack wrong because bruises taught her to hide strength. And later he saw her shoulder it clean, no apology. He saw the ledger man take up space with his hat and pen, and the church ladies arrange their pity like bouquets. Mercy does not shout to be believed. Sometimes she met him at the ferry rope with lists, salt, lamp wicks, nails. He would nod, count his coins twice, and return what change was hers to keep, not as favor, but as fairness. Once, when she reached, For the wrapped ring, he said, "Not yet." And she breathed, "Not yet," grateful to be asked. River's Bend held its breath between heat and water. The brand above the livery threw hard shadows. The river threw light beneath the cottonwoods. Captivity wore many faces. A contract, a rumor, a man's laugh behind your back. Choice was quieter, a hand offered, then withdrawn, a question that could wait. Pressure gathered like a storm scent in sage. It would not take much, one petty ordinance, one jeer turned loud, for the town to test how far a woman and a horseman would bend before they refused to break. They fined her for breathing. "Too loud," he answered with quiet silver and a river's patience. The deputy read a crumpled ordinance, naming disorderly conduct for answering a man, while the livery brand glowed hot and the river whispered otherwise. The debt man smirked to see her small. Clara lifted her chin even as thirst scraped her throat like sand. Ben Stone did not argue or flare. He set a traded silver dollar in the deputy's palm and said, "Paid." No lecture, no bargain, only a coin exchanged for quiet, like water cooling iron. Thwarted, the deputy scratched a receipt and tried to claim them with his stare. Ben turned to Clara instead and asked, "Witnesses or river?" The river, she chose, because water cools what heat would brand. They walked past the forge and its sermon of flame, past the hanging brand, into willow shade where dust fell and the current stitched low music. At the shallows, he opened her blue kerchief and set the ring in sunlight, gold warming like breath. "I won't hold it for power," he said. "I can keep it safe or give it back today. Your choice." Clara felt the circle's weight and the ghost pale band at her finger. Once it had closed like a fist. "I won't tie off my breath again," she said, and held out her wrist instead. "Then let it ask instead of bind," he answered, and tipped his head toward his bay mare. "May I take a few hairs?" he asked. The mare flicked an ear and settled as his hand smoothed her tail. With his small knife he trimmed a pinch near the dock, wetted the strands and began to braid with river-slow patience. 3 strands crossed and crossed again, simple and strong, a rhythm like music felt. Steady, obedient, to breath, no force. He made a sliding hitch, a loop that would hold then yield, living tether, not a trap. Threading the ring onto the braid, he lifted it and asked, "At your wrist, not your finger. May I tie it?" "Yes," she said, and when he tied the knot, she tightened it herself until it rested without pinching. The ring slid to the small hollow of her wrist bones and stopped. A question now, not a sentence. She tied the kerchief above it so the cloth lifted at any breeze, a soft banner of sky against her mourning. "Mercy is not a bargain," she said quietly. "It is a bridge." Ben's mouth eased. "My vow is simple. I'll keep it safe or give it back, only when you ask. I won't hurry you." She touched the pulse under the braid. "I'll keep breathing, one river wash at a time. If I forget, I'll come here and remember." Behind the willows, saloon laughter tipped and failed. Before them, water spoke in small voices that cooled the scald silence and music sharing the air. "If you need the knot looser, say," he told her. "If you need it gone, I'll cut it." "And if I need help learning what to carry and what to set down?" she asked. "Then we learn," he said, offering a trade, not charity. "I'll show you currents and horses. You show me how bellows can spare a hymn." She liked the sound of equal hands. "Trades are honest," she said, watching shadow chase along the braid. The ring rested warm where it touched her. Breath went in, breath went out. Choice spoke softly and did not falter. They walked back toward town more slowly, as if the road had widened to meet them. The forge still glared, but it no longer set the measure of things. The bracelet caught light and shadow by turns, a quiet compass at her wrist. Before the next hardness came, and it would, they had made something they could hold together. And the river kept on, indifferent and faithful, teaching her a cadence she could learn. Heat said hurry, water said wait. Clara listened, and the listening made her strong. After the vow in the shallows, they traded lessons instead of favors. Ben walked her down to the ferry rope at first light and tapped the line with 2 fingers. "Read the water," he said. "Not the shine, what pushes underneath." Clara crouched, eyes level with the current, and began to notice the way small leaves hesitated at the edge of slick green tongues. Where it braided, she marked the safer shallows. Where it grinned white, she knew to angle, not fight. Her skirt hem darkened. The ring on the horsehair kissed her wrist with each small wave. Beneath the cottonwoods, he handed her the wagon lines. "Hold your seat," he said, settling beside her without touching. She braced against the bench, felt the width of her hips, and did not apologize to the wood. At the roughest ruts, she let the weight of her body be ballast, not fault. "Strength can be quiet," she said, mostly to herself. Ben's mouth eased. "Quieter lasts longer." By noon she could back the team into a shadowed alley without scraping a wheel. Sweat gathered. The blue kerchief caught it and spared her eyes. She did not shrink from her body's weight in the seat. She used it like weather uses gravity, honest and necessary. When a line snapped, they did not wait for a man with tools. They sat together on the livery step and mended tack with an awe and patience. Ben showed her how rawhide wanted soaking, how a stitch should lie flat as a creek stone. Her fingers learned the work until the horsehair bracelet felt like a cousin to the reins. "Gentle is not weak," he said, guiding a frayed strap through a buckle. "Force is a shout. Patience is a hand that stays." Afternoons, when the heat wavered over the road, they walked the riverbank and read the moving page. Clara picked a smooth stone from a bar, turned it in her palm, and slipped it into her pocket. "To remember weight that doesn't drown," she said. "A good lesson," Ben answered, and he hummed low, a tune without words that matched the river's gait. Evening turned their tasks inward. In Clara's kitchen, lamplight pooled in a saucer. The hymn book lay open like a small barn door. She showed him letters the way he had shown her Eddie's. "This is M," she said, tracing the mountain line with a flour-dusted finger. He shaped the sound, smiling like a child surprised by a familiar path found on a page. "And this is Mercy," she added, tapping a word in a verse he had heard at a distance. "I know that one," he said quietly, and the room held the truth without ceremony. At the church, she opened the pump organ and taught him the bellows. "Let the lungs be steady," she said. He pressed the pedals, careful, and the old box sighed awake. He laughed, soft, as if a door opened to a familiar wind. "It breathes like a horse," he said. "Then ride it kindly," she answered, and played a simple hymn while he worked the air. His hum joined her melody until silence and music traded places, and both felt like home. In the corral, he showed her the difference between breaking and gentling, and let her choose how close to stand. A flag flicked, a horse tossed. Another day would have meant a fight. Ben waited, eyes soft, until the animal blew out and lowered. "There," he whispered. "Fear leaves through the nose first." Clara stepped in and touched a damp neck with her open palm, every lesson of consent moving from hand to hide. The mare leaned, not forced, and the knot inside Clara, braided from years of being managed, eased one turn. On a windless evening returning from the ford, she paused and let the river name her breath. In, out, alive, not merely spared. She touched the bracelet, the ring warmed by skin, the blue kerchief tied for sweat and signal both. The smooth stone clicked against a coin, reminding her burdens could be carried when held right. Under cottonwoods, silence pooled like shade. A new name waited where music might rise. They had spoken in skills for days. Now they risked words that could not be unmade. Ben set his palm to the furrowed trunk, asking it to keep counsel. "In town they call me Ben Stone," he said, eyes on the water stitching light. He left space, then added, "There is another if you ask for it." Clara nodded. "I want what is true." He looked up, not bold, simply sure. "Rains on stone," he said, voice low, the syllables patient as weather. "My grandmother says it means thunder's patience on the riverbed. It is the name I was given to grow into." The sound carried like water under ice. Something in Clara eased. Names can shelter or pin. This one was shelter offered, not pressed. "What name do you want for yourself?" he asked. He did not say called. He said want, the tender verb. She tasted the old title, Mrs. Dane, and felt its seam bite again. "Clara Finch," she said, after a breath. "A small bird, hardy, not owned, the kind that sings after storms and goes on." She did not apologize. She let the old skin fall and stood easier on her own. "A name is a door you open from the inside," he said. The ring on horsehair touched her wrist, and she thought, "I am not what survived me. I am what I choose next." They sat on a fallen trunk while the leaves murmured. When the light slanted, she opened a blue enamel tin from her sewing basket. Hinge, mended with wire, and laid the ring inside on a square of linen. It did not glare. It rested, sleeping metal, a circle allowed to be a question. She closed the lid and felt the quiet latch. "Will you play?" he asked. She led him to the small church where bees stitched the air. At the pump organ she worked, the bellows until the box breathed steady and let a simple hymn unfurl, not to impress but to tell the truth her hands knew. He answered with a river song from his childhood, a breath hum that moved like water over stone. No flourish, no spectacle. Recognition, pure as a nod across a crossing. Silence and music braided until both felt like speech. Back at the grove, she untied the blue kerchief and set it in her lap to embroider. With tiny running stitches she drew a river, a line that bent and kept going. Work warmed the horsehair bracelet. The braid took the oil of their days and grew more supple, more itself. "Gentle lasts longer," he said, watching the needle find its path. They stood when evening brushed the leaves with cool. "Clara Finch," he tried, and the name found her like a coat that finally matched her shoulders. "Rains on stone," she answered, tasting the weather and river, respect carrying the sound the way breath carries a tune. The cottonwoods held their names the way they held birds, without ownership, with shelter. Beyond the trees, the livery brand still glared and the road still demanded dust. But the river ran between, offering a way through. Clouds gathered on. The rimrock blew upon blue, the air edged with weather turning. When the first wind reached them, it found two people with names they had chosen and a song to remember when thunder spoke. Somewhere downriver a hammer struck iron, heat answering water. Clara slid the embroidered kerchief back on, touched the tin in her pocket, and felt the bracelet warm, small proofs against the storm coming soon enough too. Storm-bellied the rimrock while the town's heat pretended to be law. After the grove, River's Bend hardened. By noon a placard hung at the saloon, "No Indians," brush stroked with pride. The sheriff paused, then looked past it, counting dust. Ben, rains on stone where truth lived, touched Clara's sleeve without owning it. "Some signs," he murmured, "tell more about the wall than the people they name." She tightened her blue kerchief. The horsehair at her wrist warmed like a small fire that did not burn. Caldwell came smiling hard. "You're in deep water, Mrs. Dane," he said, ignoring Clara Finch when she corrected him. "Interest climbs. Be sensible. Marry me and your debts die under my brand." She heard the iron sermon over, the livery and the soft river beyond it. "None of me belongs to your mark," she answered. "I won't tie my breath to heat." At the porch, she shouldered a feed sack. Boys counted her steps like gamblers, and one jeered at her hips as if her body were public. She set the weight clean on the wagon and met his eyes. "My body earns our bread." "What do your words earn?" Another nicked the horsehair macat from Ben's saddle and smirked. Reins on Stone did not flare. He simply said, "Put the coil down." Not loud. The hand faltered. The rope came back frayed. Ben inspected the cut ends. "We fix what we can," he told. "Clara, not them. We refuse what we cannot carry." Inside the mercantile, she set her blue enamel tin beside the flour scale while she counted coins. Caldwell lifted it as if weighing help, thumbed the hinge, and found the ring on its square of linen. "Security," he said, slipping tin in question into his pocket. "Law says what was Dane's is mine until you come to sense." Clara stepped close. "That ring is mine by choice," she said. "You have no claim." He tipped his brim in a gesture polished by theft. "Papers say otherwise," he murmured. The sheriff coughed and admired the pickle barrel. Hate did not need to shout. It borrowed manners. Reins on Stone. Met her in the doorway as Caldwell passed. He did not grab. He steadied air. He took the horsehair at her wrist lightly. "Wear it where they can see it," he said. "Let them reckon with meaning they cannot brand." She pushed her sleeve back and showed the braid plain against skin. Ringless, sure. The blue kerchief's embroidered river ran above it like a quiet banner. Caldwell rode the fence lines at dusk and counted shadows he did not understand. By morning he told cafe men that cattle were vanishing across the ford, shaping fear into a story that fit his needs. The saloon keeper set the placard where the door split light. 3 men nodded as if paint could make them safe. Upriver, families kept cook fires low and children near. The river carried their songs under the roar of rumor. Clouds shouldered the rim with black bellies. In the livery the smith lifted a brand, red as threat, and the iron sang to the air. Across the street the river went still in that way of water before rain, as if listening. Heat against water, mark against flow. Clara walked the boardwalk with her head high, bracelet bright at her wrist, the name Finch steady in her chest. "I won't be branded for your comfort," she said, "to no one and everyone." By evening, word leapt rail to rail, a meeting to decide ferry rights and crossings. Caldwell promised order, the deputy promised law, some murmured about fairness and the river belonging to more than a brand. Thunder rolled once from the rimrock. Clara lifted her palm to the first cool drop and let it bead. Tomorrow she would walk into that room as Clara Finch, not as collateral, and make a choice where everyone could hear. Reins on Stone waited at the ferry rope, rein in his hair, neither urging nor withholding. "I'll stand where you ask," he said. "I don't need your voice to echo mine." She touched the horsehair and felt the answer. Past pressed like heat. The river answered with patience. Between them, mercy held, a shelter sturdy enough. They had gathered to brand a river. She rose to name it free. The meeting swelled in the blacksmith's yard because the forge was hot and the pump stood near, because heat liked a stage and water did not. Caldwell took the front with his hat in hand, the sheriff hovering beside him as if law were a shadow that needed a larger man. Reins on Stone waited at the edge where Willowshade would have been, hands loose, presence solid as a post that did not bind. Clara felt the blue kerchief lift at her wrist and stepped forward before Caldwell's first smooth syllable could lay claim. My name is Clara Finch, she said, letting the new name stand in daylight. The hush that followed had weight. We are told this is about fairy rights. It is also about what belongs to whom. So I'll say it plainly. Coercion is not courtship. Fear is not safety. A river belongs to more than a brand. Caldwell smiled the way a man shows teeth without friendship. Ma'am, you have got debts and a poor grasp of choice, she said, and his word died. I have a perfect grasp of choice. She turned, palm up, to the yard. Some of you have called me unlucky. Some of you watched a sign go up that called neighbors dogs. That is not safe. That is cowardice. The placard leered from the saloon's doorway, no Indians or dogs. She crossed the yard, boots ringing on boards, and lifted it from its nail. The saloon-keeper's mouth opened. The sheriff's gaze went to his boots. She brought the sign back like a thing caught in a net, set it on the blacksmith's anvil, and met the smith's eyes. May I borrow your fire? He nodded once, cheeks working. She slid the board into the forge until paint blistered and curled, hate rising in a black breath. The crowd flinched, not at the word, but at the heat. Clara took the pump handle, worked it until cold water sang into the bucket, and turned the stream over the coals. Steam lifted, and the hiss was an answer older than any ordinance. Heat versus water sounded in her hands, visible as any sermon. She pulled the charred board free and laid it down, inert, its letters dissolving to ash. That is what we will do, she said to no one and everyone. We will not make policy out of contempt. Caldwell's patience snapped and then reset, all within the press of his lips. You think fire and a girl's speech changes the law? You have property of mine in a blue tin. You took my tin, she answered, sure of the pump's rhythm. Return it. What the law says is mine can ride in my pocket, he said, tapping his coat. Murmurs crested, the kind that separate folks into those who will watch and those who will witness. The blacksmith stepped closer with his tongs balanced idly, not threatening, simply available. Clara did not beg the sheriff. She did not touch Caldwell. She stood a breath away and lifted her hand, palm up. You can be a man folks remember for giving back what is not yours, she said, or you can be small. The old woman who stitched tablecloths for the church folded her hands tighter. The saloon keeper bit his lip. Caldwell weighed the weight of a town looking. He produced the blue enamel tin, slowly, and set it in her palm with a flourish meant to mock. She opened it. The ring slept on linen, a circle that had once choked and now waited. She slid the horsehair bracelet loose and threaded the ring onto it, the braid warmed by work and days. She tied it at her wrist where the sun could see, not as surrender, but as claim. You will not decide what this means, she said, not just to Caldwell. I do. Rains on Stone did not echo her. He stood within reach, steady enough that a body could read him and rest without leaning. His voice came only when the hush grew gentle. This river has carried my people longer than your fences have carried brand, he said, even. We cross in peace. We teach our children the currents. We left the banks as we found them. The ferry should be for all who are honest. Music and silence shared a ripple through the yard. Her words with edges and his with water under stone. A harmony, without rehearsal. The deputy shifted, then stilled. A boy who had cut a horsehair looked at his hands as if they belonged to him again. Clara lifted the bucket once more and let a thin arc of water fall where sparks had popped. Let it be written that rivers are not cattle, she said. Let it be known that we do not marry women with threats. Vote, Caldwell snapped, squeezing the word until it bruised. Take a vote, and we will see. We will, she said, and we will remember who we are when we mark it. Thunder laced the rimrock, a promise more than a warning. The forge coughed and settled. Outside the yard, horses crowded the hitch as if a wind had pushed them. Reins on stone. Tipped his chin the slightest bit, eyes on the street's far bend. Clara felt the bracelet's weight and the river stone in her pocket as if both had warmed. The town drew breath to choose, and something on the wind smelled of wet iron and coming trouble. Heat turned from noise to danger. Hooves hammered, and water had to answer with mercy. Before anyone could tally hands, Caldwell snapped his whip and drove a remuda down Main. A lantern toppled, oil-kissed boards, and wind gathered embers like gossip, slinging them toward the cottonwoods. Heat quit bragging and became a hazard. Screams scattered. The sheriff grabbed his hat. Men reached for pistols fast. Reins on stone did not draw. He stepped into dust with a willow switch and a low song, the pitch he used to settle yearlings. He took the lead mare's eye with his shoulder, angled like a gate, and flicked air, not hiding. Horses found the hum and began to follow out. Clara ran for the ferry rope. Everything she had learned stood up at once. Read the green tongues. Let the current work. Make weight for a friend. She threw the scow off its post, let the upstream corner bite, and felt the line sing. The flatboat swung broadside, a moving fence between the stampede and the mothers gathered at the bank. She set her boots and rode the shove, body a keel. Fear kept outside her ribs. The bracelet held steady. A small boy in a red cap slipped from the dock into the green. Clara saw the flash, then absence. She jammed the oar, scissored the current, and let the ferry kiss the eddy's lip where leaves hesitate. She reached with both arms, caught cloth, then bone, then breath. The ring on the horsehair lit the water like a small sun and came up with his fist. She hauled him over, rolled him to his side, and the river spat flood from his mouth. He coughed once, then wailed for air. Behind her, fire ran the fence line quickly as rumor. Before her, the river stayed. She pumped the landing bucket and threw water where boards crackled, then shoved the scow again into the path of flailing hooves. The smith and two boys formed a line without being told. Work, not noise, spread. Rain threatened, but the wind held its breath. Reins on stone bent the herd at the last yard. A gelding struck flint and skidded. Another found the path his hum marked and followed. Caldwell spurred too close to burning oil. His stallion lunged sideways, and he went into a wheel rut, then backward into the brown arm of the river. For a breath, the current took him like freight. His hat spun past. His hand, surprised to be empty, beat water and sank. The yard gasped, but nobody moved yet. He handed the willow to a lanky boy. "Stand there. Quiet," he said, and dove clean. He knifed downstream to keep from fighting the pull, then rose where the whirl gave a body back. Caldwell thrashed once, went under. Reins on stone ducked, hooked an elbow across his chest, and kicked toward the ferry's lee, where eddies soften. The song came back as breath, a hum between clenched teeth, patient as weather, steady as the rope that steadies a small craft. He aimed for Clara's hands, waiting. Clara reached with the gaff, braced her hips the way she'd practiced, and levered, both men to the planks. Caldwell rolled and vomited. Blood ticked from a cut on his brow. Without ceremony, Clara untied her blue kerchief and bound it, knotting firm. The little embroidered river ran bright on his forehead, a ribbon of sky holding. "Back, Heath." She looked him in the eye without malice. "You're breathing. That is enough." She kept her hand steady and sure. The sheriff arrived and, for once, stopped to see. Herd turning without shots, fire beaten back by work, the cattleman coughing, under a bandage tied by the woman he'd tried to own. "Harlan Caldwell, he said. "You're under arrest for incitement, endangerment, and theft." He took Caldwell's wrists. The iron he used was not a brand. Not this time, anyway. People gathered and did not jeer. Rain came in strokes. On Clara's wrist the ring glinted with river light, a witness, not a chain. The boy in the red cap clung and then let go. She felt smooth stone and the work ahead. Mend, welcome, build. A crossing of mercy. After the fire and shouting, their future arrived quiet as rain, ordinary as rope drying in the sun. They scraped char from the boards, set fresh posts, and let the river teach them a steadier cadence. Noise had tried to rule them. Water answered with work. Clara kept her sleeve high so the horsehair and ring could gleam without apology. They were small and brave. A plank roof, a box stove, 2 benches where strangers could sit with palms thawing over tin cups. A shelf held books and spare lines. A hook took the blue kerchief when she came in. On the door she chalked a plain code. Heat the stove for everyone. Call people by their names. Never charge fear. Reins on stone tightened knots, checked pulleys, and wrote the fares fair and plain. Camp families and town families came to the same stove and learned the same rope. A woman with flour on her sleeves traded a story for a crossing. A hunter left wood for the next traveler. The boy in the red cap carried messages and counted steps until he could read numbers and names. Mercy was not a mood. It was policy, written in the way the day was run. They spoke their vows in open air, not to make a show, but to keep faith from shrinking. Neighbors came because work ran through their days. A few from upriver stood near, respectful and glad. The blacksmith leaned on his tongs and smiled. The seamstress brought bread still warm. Clara and Reins on Stone stood by the ferry rope and said what they meant in words they would remember. She said, "I choose you in the open, without owning or hiding. I choose you to guard my breath, and I will guard yours." He said, "I will keep. My hands gentle and my aims clear. I will listen like river stones and be home beside you, not a wall." Then they poured 1 tin cup of river water over the threshold plank, not to bless it, but to remember who would teach patience. Work swallowed celebration which suited them. He fitted a saddle to her body the way a carpenter fits a chair, seeing where weight wanted to live and making room for it. No apology crossed his face when leather needed more drop. "Love is a seat that fits," he said, and the words made a place in her. On a hot noon she waded to her waist and looked down at sunlight on her thighs. She laughed and let the river hold what it could and carry the rest. In the evening the pump organ breathed again. Reins on Stone worked the bellows with an even foot while Clara found the hymn that matched the day's weather. His low melody braided through hers like a current under a tune. Silence did not leave. It simply learned to rest between notes. The found family arrived without trumpets. The boy in the red cap swept the porch mornings and learned his letters at the table at noon. The seamstress mended cuffs for a story. The blacksmith brought nails and stayed to warm his hands and listen. Folks from upriver crossed with bundles, returned with flour and news. They left the banks as they found them and were greeted by name. Mercy was policy, a sentence written in chalk and kept in practice. Some days she tried the ring on her finger to test her breath, then slid it back to the braid, smiling at the choice. No one asked her to hurry meaning, not even Reins on Stone, who never measured love by metal. The blue kerchief hung by the door like a square of sky, ready for sweat, welcome, or bandage. In a shallow dish on the windowsill, the river stone kept its small promise, weight held, not hurled. At dusk, the ferry slid home. Both banks waited and were met with open hands and mercy. If this story's mercy met you halfway, linger with us. Like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves gentle courage and chosen love. Your support helps us keep making long-form Western romances that honor healing, consent, and quiet strength. If you'd like more crossings like this, tap the bell so the next river finds you. In the comments, tell us what contrast moved you most: hate versus mercy, captivity versus choice, heat versus water, silence versus music, or past versus future. Which motif will you carry into your week? The ring riding a horsehair bracelet, the steady river, the sky blue kerchief by the door, or a smooth stone that holds weight without drowning you. Share a line you want to remember, or a small policy of mercy you plan to practice. A sign you will take down, a kindness you will set in place. Author's note: this fiction honors Apsáalooke people of the Yellowstone region. We do not speak for any nation, and we avoid sacred specifics. Names, songs, and daily practices in this story are kept general and respectful, shaped by public histories and the lived rhythms of river, horse, and camp. Depictions of community life, crossing places, and gentling horses aim for dignity over drama. When in doubt, we choose restraint. Sources and thanks. Montana, Historical Society resources on rivers and settlement along the Yellowstone. Frank B. Linderman's Plenty Coos, Chief of the Crows, read with care and historical caveats. Writings and talks by Dr. Joseph Medicine Crow. Crow Reservation Histories and Collections via Little Bighorn College, and guidance from Indigenous, led publications and style guides. We extend gratitude to scholars, culture bearers, and working historians who help keep the record honest. Any errors are ours alone, and we welcome respectful corrections. Until next time, may your crossings be steady, your breath unhurried, your ring mean only what you choose, and your kerchief hang like a square of sky. Content care. This episode touches on grief, coercion, and past spousal abuse without graphic detail. If those themes stir pain, take what serves you and leave the rest. We have support links in the description. Finally, to everyone who adds kindness, thank you. Stories become crossings when many feet pass safely. Keep a stone in your pocket to remember your strength. Keep a blue square by the door, and meet the next river with a steady, chosen breath.